Each exhibition has its own history and theme. As a curator, I've learned stories from artists that differed from the history I've been taught in school. Over the course of 15 years, I sometimes initiated exhibitions that asked artists to reinterpret the past and present. But often, my choice of an exhibition subject was brought forward by encountering artists' works. Each exhibition was like diving underwater to see what hadn't been visible from the surface. I refer to this history as suppressed layers of memories. The job of the curator differs from that of artists. In order to exhibit this work to the public, curators may feel the need for more context, more history. So choosing a filmic environment was, metaphorically speaking, to go diving with you, to record and share the underwater view, to swim around these layers of history, being vividly revealed by artists. In the process, this film has become an exploration of curating itself. This history is about why history needs many voices and how a curator might tell stories through these different voices. I'm curating artists who have inspired and challenged my memory. I'm also adding behind-the-scenes stories from which I learned so much. In conventional exhibitions, these stories stay as footnotes, but I wanted to recover these through this film. Imagine that you are wandering through an exhibition with me, alongside you, whispering to you about what happened while I was preparing the show, the conflicts, the gossip, the archives, and the references. I'm at the British Library. I asked to see a Korean manuscript, but I'm told it is a prohibited item. They explain that this is to minimize contact with the air as much as possible. They will not grant me permission straight away, but instead ask why I want to see it. The curator of the collection happens to be working from home, so they will have to send an email. The curator and I know of each other, but I'm still nervous. Since my fate is unclear, they also suggest I look at the digital version of the book I want to see.
예를 들어서 지금 이제 우리나라도 현재 이렇게 보면은 남북 간의 어떤 그런 정상회담을 지금 4월 말에 진행하기로 해서 이제 여러 가지 이제 준비를 많이 하고 있는데 남북 정상회담과 관련된 처음서부터 끝까지 모든 걸 갖다가 하나의 기록으로 남깁니다. 지금은 이제 보통 이제 백서라는 말을 많이 쓰지요.
It is quite interesting how Dr. Lee talked about the summit between North and South Korea as an example. The first summit was in 2000. Park Chan-kyung's earlier film, Flying, is made up of all footage of the plane in the sky during the first North and South Korean summit. Staring at a plane for 8 minutes may sound tedious, but 8 minutes is only a moment when compared with the surreal 50 years of division. After waiting for almost 3 hours, I was finally granted access. It is hard to describe, but holding this tangible manuscript in my hand taught me innumerable things in a short space of time. But then I realized one important fact. There was no depiction of the king, just an empty chair. The manuscript depicts the 60th wedding anniversary of Lady Haegyong and Prince Sado, who died many years before his wife. The king ordered Prince Sado's death by shutting him in a rice chest for 8 days. This tragedy of the king killing his own son shocked the world. Historians have proposed various reasons for Prince Sado's death and for the conflict between the prince and his father, King Yeongjo. But the most vivid reconstructions have been inspired by the memoirs of Prince Sado's wife, remembered as Lady Haegyong from the Hong family. She was the same age as Prince Sado, both being only 27 years old when the tragedy parted them. When she was about 60, an important age in Korean culture, she began writing about the unspeakable event. Because she was writing from memory, some historians have argued that she fabricated the stories for political reasons. She was indeed at the center of political turmoil, but for me, her voice meant something else.
(2014년 4월 16일) 오전 9시 5분쯤 세월호는 이미 40도 가까이 기울었습니다. 그리고 1시간 뒤인 10시 반쯤 제대로 된 구조활동 없이 세월호는 단원고 학생 250명, 일반인 54명을 태운 채 전복됐습니다.
발견에서 구조까지의 전 과정을 전동건 기자가 정리했습니다.
파쇄기로 파내고 있었습니다. 그때 갑자기 높이 10cm, 너비 30cm의 조그만 구멍이 보였습니다. 무언가 희미한 사람 소리도 들렸습니다.
딱 돌아서려는데 소리가 들리는 것 같아요. 그래서 이제 나 딱 나하고 119 딱 내려가서 보니까 거기에 이제 사람 살이 보이더라고요.
I was 15 years old when the Seongsu Bridge collapsed, and my junior high school was a special art school with many students commuting from all over Seoul. I also had to cross the river to get to school, so I vividly remember the panic that spread all around the school. What if one of the school buses had been crossing the bridge right at the moment of the collapse? The broken bridge was just the beginning, as the 1990s were marked by numerous man-made disasters. I believe that it was the middle ground that disappeared. A symbolic common ground where people with different mindsets might have met.
(12월 20일) 서부독일 단전지대로 가는 광부 253명의 결단식과 환송식이 있었습니다. 심한 경쟁을 물리치고 합격한 이들 젊은 광부들은 앞으로 서부독일 광산에 가면은 고기를 선양하고 우수한 기술을 배워오겠다고 선서했습니다.
You lived in London for a while, so does that mean that Western art became part of you, or are you still saying that would be inauthentic?
그치. 그건 이제 그때 느꼈던 감정은 뭐냐면 다르다는 걸 더 확실하게 느꼈던 거죠. 그러니까 생각하는 방식도 다르고, 그러니까 뭔가 표현하는 방식도 다르고, 그리고 그 문화는 예술이라는 게 이렇게 갑자기 생긴 게 아니라 어느 정도 역사와 이렇게 중첩된 시간에 의해서 만들어지는 문제의식이잖아요. 뭔가 가치라든가 그 시대의 사람들 고민이라든가 이런 것들이 그 시대를 통해서 만들어지는 게 예술인데 그게 나는 한국이라는 역사가 있고 한국이 자라고 이런 그런 것들을 통해서 내가 내 그림을 만들어야 되는데 내 그림이 그런 그림이 아니라 단지 서구화되어 있는 그림을 그리면 이게 나는 뿌리가 없는 거잖아. 그러니까 그런 측면에서 그걸 알게 하고 또 그런 걸 느끼게 했던 게 런던에서 삶이었던 거죠.
There's a very different interpretation of the DMZ that comes from another artist, and he's essentially imagined what the landscape would look like through night vision goggles.
Correct,
So
yes.
the whole landscape has this red tone to it. And again, this is someone who's done his military service.
Yes,
in
he was
Korea.
he's doing his national service near the DMZ, and through the night goggles, he was able to see a beautiful scenery. So thus the color comes from the night goggles. However, he mixed that together with kind of traditional Korean paintings. And it's kind of utopian vision of a landscape that doesn't really exist. In 2004, I was studying a master's in history of art at University College London. Through a chain of coincidences, I found out about an exhibition called Korea at the Museum of Modern Art, New York. The year of the exhibition was 1951. Most people hearing about that might just let it pass. But knowing that the Korean War had begun in 1950, with the ceasefire being signed in 1953, it seemed very odd to me. So I asked several Korean experts on photography and art history whether they had heard about the New York show on Korea when the peninsula had been at war. Everyone I spoke to was shocked to hear about its existence. But another exhibition, curated by the same person, Edward Steichen, is known throughout the world. You probably know the exhibition too. It's famous, The Family of Men. The show came to South Korea in 1957, attracting a staggering 300,000 visitors. So I decided to write my dissertation on this show, and I was spending so much time in London University Library in Bloomsbury. Do you know this white totalitarian-looking building with its heavy doors? I was trying to open a door while carrying 10 things at once when an elderly man who looked like a guard opened the door for me. He asked me if I was Korean. There weren't many Koreans in London back then. He showed me a picture of himself smiling alongside several Korean boys. I felt so strange. This man had once been a young boy standing on the soil where I grew up, even before my parents were born. The present from the past was aimed at reaching all the British Korean War veterans who have been obscured along with this forgotten war. I asked 4G artists whether they could reinterpret the meaning of the Korean War and donate the works for a charity auction. Hence, the present from the past. With the money raised from the auction, we reproduced 40 artworks on 2,500 sets of postcards. Then we sent a set to every veteran that we knew was still alive. We managed to find more than 2,000 addresses, but the number was reducing rapidly. The postcards became our dandelion seeds. So why a 60-year commemoration? Present from the past marked 60 years since the outbreak of the Korean War. In Korean culture, 60 years represent a full life cycle. The importance of one's 60th birthday is based on the astrology of the lunar calendar. 12 animals and 5 elements make up 60 different combinations. Out of 60 name combinations available, the year of the yellow snake was written for the depicted event in the manuscript. This was mistakenly interpreted as being 1869, but it was in fact 1809.
Curating is a lot about looking at a lot of things. You know, the basis for curating is the curator has seen more than anybody else. Well, with Korean books, that was not the case for me because, you know, there aren't that many Korean books. I used to see things in thousands and thousands of Korean books in the way that this Japanese professor had. And so that was really how I learned. But the big manuscript, that royal manuscript of 1809, which is part of the Ganghwa Island manuscripts, that was just another instance of what you might call lost memory. It was a the British Library and the British Museum used to be one. So it was acquired by the British Library around about 1890. So I guess one generation after the events on Ganghwa Island. No, they didn't. Nobody knew what it was. There was nobody in London really that had any expertise. I think they knew it was Korean, but they misidentified it. The title refers to the Gisa year. So in the published catalogues that I found, it was described as a manuscript of 1869 instead of 1809.
(1994) marked 600 years since Seoul became the capital of Korea. As one of a number of scholars searching documents for traces of Seoul, Professor Lee Dae-jin of Seoul National University came to the British Library. Together with him in 1995, Beth finally reattributed this royal manuscript to the correct date. A few months before the collapse of the Sampung department store, I left Seoul to study overseas. I knew the collapsed building well. I used to go there with friends to have a snack after school. We would have a bite to eat before heading off to our drawing school. I had been such a loud student, but after leaving Korea, I became the quietest of all, especially on a day like this. When classmates kept asking me a lot of questions about how a department store could fall down, I continued taking art and art history classes. I remember the final art project. You can choose any work in the whole world, said my art history teacher. It was going to be my first curation. Mine was called simply The Hands. The exhibition was going to have an area looking like a hand. The first viewing gallery, at the thumb, was going to have the creation of Adam. My world was already becoming very Western. I was shocked to find that Julian, the most handsome man I used to draw to perfect our drawing skills in Korea, was in fact in between the night and day figures in the funerary chamber. He was one of the Medici. In Western art, the human presence is in addition to nature, whereas in Eastern art, humans are in harmony with nature and do not attempt to conquer it. Did you know that in Korea, only a single portrait of the king is allowed to be made? That's why the manuscript I mentioned at the beginning never included any depiction of the king. Instead, there is a screen showing the sun, the moon, and the 5 peaks to signify that the king was present.
대한제국이 건립이 되면서 기존의 1월 5공, 즉 1월 5공 자체가 왕을 전통적으로 상징을 합니다. 그래서 1월 5공이 놓임으로써 왕의 얼굴은 감히 그릴 수 있는 대상이 아니었기 때문에 이 자리에 왕이 참석했다라는 것을 이제 알려주는 기능을 하는 게 1월 5공병인데요. 1월 5공병 앞에 왕의 어자가 이제 빨간색에서 황금색, 노란색으로.
In Taoist paintings, you hardly ever see human figures. Living with nature was the teaching.
(46회) 베니스 비엔날레에서 설치미술가 전수천 씨가 방황하는 혹성들 속에 토우라는 작품으로 특별상을 수상했습니다. 한편 김영삼 대통령은 오늘 제46회 베니스 국제미술제에서 우리 미술사상 처음으로 특별상을 수상한 설치미술작가 전수천 씨에게 축전을 보내 격려했습니다.
베트남도 참 재밌었어요. 왜냐하면 내가 헬기를 타고 다녔어요. 군인들의 식량 보급, 식사 이런 걸 담당해 줘가지고 굉장히 좋은 일을 했어요. 헬기 타고 이렇게 이송도 해주고 또 밥 먹고 싶어 할 거 아니에요. 그러면 김치랑 사다가 만들어서 베트남에서 김치 만들게 해가지고 나눠주라고 하고.
I didn't know it was going to be his last interview. This interview took place in the hospital a few weeks after his brain surgery. He told me how he had painted movie posters in Seoul in the 60s, and then he had gone to Japan to study in the 70s. He had roamed around New York streets with Nam June-paik in the 80s. After he attended the Venice Biennale as the first Korean artist in the 90s, he dreamed of crossing the US on a train as his brush. He fulfilled his dream in 2005. Kim Gu-rim's story was rediscovered with his show at the Tate in 2012. He was shown alongside works by David Hockney and Jackson Pollock in an exhibition called A Bigger Splash. I said rediscovered because in Korea, he was known as the first to have created experiment art cinema and performance in Burning the Lawn as early as 1970. His work continues to show his lifelong interest in the philosophy of yin and yang. They are complementary rather than opposing forces. They interact to form a dynamic system in which the whole is greater than the assembled parts. According to this philosophy, everything has both yin and yang aspects. When you burn your grass, although you kill the grass, the charred ground will get hotter and harmful insects will be destroyed. And so the grass will grow back stronger. The moon we see is a reflection of the sun. The moon doesn't generate light, so without the sun, the moon would be dark.
60 years ago this month, an armistice brought an end to the Korean War. By then, the conflict had lasted for 3 years, drawn in 20 nations and caused more than 1 million deaths. But a new exhibition in London looks at the war from an artist's perspective. I've been to see it. Many artistic styles make it into this exhibition, from portrait to sculpture to photography and video installations. The idea is to interpret a long-ago conflict and bring the events to life in a new way. It's often called the Forgotten War, remarkable considering that 20 nations were involved. Over the 3 years of the conflict, there were 4 million casualties, scarring lives on both sides of the eventual ceasefire line. Have you ever been back?
No, I haven't been back. Friends of mine have actually procured on their laptops pictures of Seoul. I couldn't believe it. It was absolutely like a phoenix rising from the ashes.
왜냐면 우리 어렸을 때도 사실 어른들이 그런 얘기 많이 했죠. 전쟁 나고 나서 전쟁 즈음에 해방 이후에 똑똑한 사람들은 다 빨갱이였고 다 이북 같다 그런 말도 있고 김수영 씨의 그런 식구가 나와요. 나는 지식인들 중에 시인들 중에 꼬레비다. 그 꼬레비다라는 말이 뭐냐면 좋은 지식인들 시인들은 다 이북 같기 때문에 여기 남은 사람 중에 그나마 자기가 지금 나름대로 주목받는 시인 행세를 하는 거는 그 선배들이 다 이북 같기 때문이다 뭐 그런 식의 표현이 있어요.
모든 국제전에도 전에는 국제전에 내는 작가를 어떻게 하냐면 그 사람 이름 보고 그 이름을 지명했는데 그거 절대로 안 된다 그래가지고 내가 부의사장이 되면서 안대반땅이라는 심사를 받지 않는 전람회를 한 거야. 누구나 자기 하고 싶은 거 열심히 해서 갖다 돈 내고 걸으면 되니까. 그러면 거기에서 우수한 애들은 이름을 뽑는 게 아니라 작품 보고 우리나라 국가대표로 외국에 보낸 거예요.
Well, there is a very clear cut in the abstract artists that work in the 70s and the figurative artists, so-called Minjung, that work in the 80s. That cut is like the division of Korea in two. What is interesting is that the next generation that appears in the 90s completely kills that problem and makes it very interesting and complicated at the same time.
Lee Myung-han works as a pedicurist in Essen. He is a Vietnam War veteran who came to Germany in 1974 as a minor. I asked him about the defoliant. Ajang Orange. In response, he said the physical pain he still suffers today and that he thought had been caused by the mine accident might all along have been caused by the defoliant.
서울을 흉내내는 게 제일 목적이에요. 난지도 쓰레기장에 서울 모든 곳에 있는 쓰레기들이 모여서 산을 이룬 그 꼭대기에서 이 트럭들이 오는 길이 정해져 있어요. 여기는 서대문구, 여기는 강남구, 여기는 어디였죠? 은평구 뭐 이런 식으로 각 지역별로 쓰레기를 모으는데 그 쓰레기의 종류가 다르고 근데 그 쓰레기들이 한 곳에 모여서 하나의 산을 이루고 그러니까 조각과 조각이라는 개념을 계속 관심을 갖고 있고 그게 내 작품의 근본이니까 이제 그런 생각들이 난지도에서 형성된 게 최근 작업에 이르면 쓰레기와 예술의 차이 그러니까 쓰레기와 유물의 차이 사실은 유물은 옛날에 쓰레기였고 쓰레기를 발굴하다가 건지는 거고 같은 거거든. 그러한 대립된 것들이 아니라 전체가 하나이다라는 생각을 하게 된 게 난지도.
제가 원래 초등학교 때 친구집에 갔었는데요. 그 당시에는 이제 그 책이 뭔지는 정말 몰랐었는데 테이블 위에 이제 하얀색 두꺼운 책이 있었어요. 이렇게 펼쳐보니까 거기에 이제 흑백 사진들이 몇 개가 이렇게 들어있었는데 그 중에 하나의 사진이 뭐냐면 이렇게 욕조에 그 하얀색 팬티만 입은 남자들이 이렇게 뒤에 묶여가지고 물고문 당하는 그런 사진들 뭐 이런 것들 이렇게 연출해서 찍은 그런 사진들이더라고요. 그러니까 80년대에는 그게 정치적 구분 서적이었겠지요. 근데 그 이미지들을 보면서 이게 뭐지 하고 읽었는데 그 당시에 써 있었던 게 이제 민주화 운동을 하는 여학생들이 어떤 성부문을 받았었는지가 써 있었는데 그때 이제 내용이 이런 내용이었었어요. 그러다가 제 머릿속에서 이렇게 지워져 있었어요.
Chang is speaking through these 12 breaking instruments where each performer sits on a saddle studded with protruding crystals. The crystals inscribe messages on the performer. While pedaling the wheels, the women are subjected to both pain and pleasure, sweating and singing old folk labor songs which go back to 17th century Korea. The body for Chang is in essence a sensory system. The things that give the body pain and pleasure are cultural and social factors originating from both the Western and Eastern worlds. It is as if Korea's condensed history has resulted in different memories being mixed afresh rather than stacked on top of one another. And I believe this has brought together entirely different forms of modernity. I imagined a person painting a new color while a previously applied tone is still wet. This would result in unexpected colors. For Jiazhang, bodies have layers of memories. I decided to walk around Seoul. I heard cold music in the distance. I realized that the music was part of a ceramic installation, recreating King Jeongjo's March to Hwaseong. King Jeongjo is the son of the tragic crown prince Sado. He made an annual visit to his father's mausoleum. In the year of his father's 60th birthday, 1795, there took place one of the most exuberant marches from Seoul to Hwaseong. King Jeongjo took his mother, Lady Haegyong, with him. The fact this particular scene was depicted in Cheonggye Creek was ironic because it was King Jeongjo's grandfather, King Yeongjo, who laid the foundation for the Cheonggye Creek. And King Yeongjo was a tyrant who killed his own son. To others, he was the fairest king. I began to wonder whether he could be both.
정선이 활동했던 주된 영조대고요. 이제 신윤복이 활동했던 정조대입니다. 그런데 우리가 문화절정기라고 할 때는 이제 숙종대부터 영종조대까지를 이야기하거든요. 이제 요기가 가장 그 핵심이라고 보면 될 것 같고요. 그림은 영원할 거예요. 왜? 더 많은 이야기를 하거든. 여기 이제 원본 방이에요. 이게 이제 총 12장인데, 예. 그래서 이제 아까 기방에서 술 기다리는 장면이고, 저 혼자 갓 벗고 있는 남자 있잖아. 여기 이제 거의 저 마담의 기동서방이에요. 거의 매일 와서. 자기 안방인 것처럼. 이제 4명이 기다리고 있는 건 술이고, 저 술병 들고 오고 있는 거 보이죠? 예. 그래서 이제 재밌는 건 술을 마시는 모습으로 그리지 않고, 술을 기다리는 모습으로 그렸죠. 이것도 여행 떠나기 전에 도시권과 같은 맥락이에요. 여기 이제 선술집이에요. 5명이 모두 서서 마시죠, 술을. 그래서 이제 경찰들인데 이분들도 순찰 돌다가 지금 목말라가지고선 목 죽이러 왔어요. 이 때는 바야흐로 봄날 진달래. 맨 왼쪽은 이 술집의 이제 아르바이트생. 이렇게. 옷 입은 게 다르죠? 봐봐요, 옷만 봐도.
저 인디고 파란색 저거 예쁜데.
예쁘죠? 그리고 그 파란색도요, 농담이 다 조금씩 달라요. 이게 핵심이에요, 사실은. 같은 파란색을 넣어도 농담을 조금씩 다양하게 해서 변화를 주는 것. 그렇다고 아예 다른 색깔로 깔기엔 어지러워지니. 그래서 결국은 섹스는 요체는 비슷한 것들을 농담을 다채롭게 하는 것이 비결이 아닌가라는 생각을 저는 합니다.
여기 인테리어랑 안이랑 바뀌어서
좋죠. 저 그릇 올려져 있는 아래에 있는 게 뒤주예요. 쌀떡.
뒤주.
쌀떡, 예, 뒤주. 사도세자가 갇혀 죽었잖아요, 거기서.
살아남은 자들은 부끄러움을 씻기 위해 사회에 대한 포문을 열고 저항을 시작한다.
모든 강제로 집권한 총칼로 집권한 정권들이 처음에 해야 되는 건 국민과 이 타협을 해야 되잖아요. 그러면 보통 선심 정책, 뭔가가 눈에 띄는 정책을 해줘야 되는데 이 정권은 앞 정권과 다르다. 그걸 이 군사 정권이니까 첫 번째 생각한 게 삼천교육대예요. 삼천교육대는 뭐냐면 그야말로 깡패들 소탕 작전인데, 그래서 사람들이 마음 놓고 밤거리를 걸어 다닐 수 있고 장사를 하게 해주겠다. 저 학부모들이 만화책 본다고 굉장히 그 공부에 방해된다고 고민을 많이 하고 있습니다라고 누군가 얘기했겠지. 그래서 다음 타자가 만화가 됐어. 만화 정화운동. 그때가 가을이었었어요. 8월 10년 가을. 비는 이렇게 분위기 있게 추적추적 부슬비가 내리는데 대한민국 전국 만화가들이 그게 다 불려간 거야. 우리는 미풍양속에 저해되는 만화를 그리지 않는다. 우리는 우방국가, 이웃국가에 대한 비방을 하거나 폄훼하는 만화를 그리지 않는다. 이렇게 구절이 다 애매한 거예요. 그러니까 희한하게 안기부 마당이 지금 어디냐 하면 남산 미라국민학교 옆에 있는 애니메이션 센터예요. 서울 만화 애니메이션 센터 그 자리가 옛날에 안기부 자리였다. 세상이랑 얼마나 아이러니한지 몰라요.
굉장히 무시무시했지. 일단 무서웠지. 그때는 국보위 시절이야. 국가 뭐 보위 시절인가 뭐 그건 어떤 정부 기구도 아니었고 날조해서 만든 그러니까 전두환 대통령 만들기 위한 그러면서 이제 중앙정부나 이런 것들이 하는 역할. 그러니까 어떤 절차나 이런 거 무시하고 자기들이 문제가 된다면 들여다가 뭐 마음대로 할 수 있는 그런 조직이었거든. 우리 딴에는 즐겁게 했지만 내용상으로는 문제가 될 수 있는 것들이었잖아. 그리고 들떠서 그렇게 시작을 했는데 불이 턱턱 꺼지니까 이거 정전인가 했는데 그게 아니라 너희들이 문제가 있다는 제보가 들어와서 이거 큰일 나는 거 아닌가. 좀 더 발상을 좀 달리 하는 그런 촛불은 뭘까? 촛불은 결국 왜 들었느냐? 아주 쉽게 얘기해서 유토피아를 만들자고 들은 게 아니냐? 그럼 우리의 유토피아는 뭐냐? 옛부터 도화꽃 만발한 무릉도원 아니냐? 도화끼, 도화살. 그래갖고 그냥 산 복숭아꽃이 만발한 서울시 이성계하고 정두전이 결국은 그리는 꿈을 꿨을 거 아니야. 그리고 우리 촛불 사람들이 꾸는 꿈이 무엇인가? 무릉도원이 아니겠냐. 이제 이렇게 생각하고 이걸 이제 하나 그렸고, 그런데 이제 전시를 하지 못하겠다고. 북한 냄새가 난다 이게야.
맞아요. 저도 그 얘기하려고 했어요.
딴 사람이란 몰라도 이목상이라면 틀림없이 걸고 넘어진다.
해서 이른바 민중이라는 말을 남발해 무질서하게 파고드는 현재의
근데 한국은 너무 심하게 박정희 때부터 전두환을 거치면서 너무 심하게 뭐 사상이나 이런 것에 자유가 없었고 너무 검열이 심했고 그러니까 오히려 이미 전통 말씀에 상당히 벗어났음에도 불구하고 세계적으로는 여기서는 거꾸로 막스 레닌주의 쪽으로 더 학생들이나 노동운동하는 사람들이 관심을 더 많이 갖게 됐죠. 그때 만약에 그런 검열이 없었다면 덜 했을 거예요.
점점 거꾸로 흐르고 이제 더 이상 2014년이 아니고 지금은 1989년 8월 26일 한낮에 와 있어요. 자, 어떤 장면이 떠오르나요?
예, 학교 앞에 길거리를 걷고 있어요.
그래서 그 무섭고 두렵고 불안한 어른들에 의해서 둘러싸여서 어린 학생이 불안하고 두렵고 무서웠던 느낌을 그대로 느껴보세요.
홍성담이 간첩인 걸 알았지? 라고 저한테 묻습니다. 저는 몰랐다고
이게 이제 한 소리가 나와요. 벗어나고 싶다는 말이에요.
The prosecutor asked him whether he knew Hong Song-dam. The fellow art student of this man was being hypnotized. Hong Song-dam was part of the political resistance as a student, as were many Minjung artists. Hong produced posters and woodcuts to communicate with citizens. He was imprisoned and tortured. In the year I was born, the May 18th Gwangju Democratic Uprising took place. My mom does not remember anything because the news never reported this event. When I left Korea in 1995, the Gwangju Biennale was founded in the spirit of the Gwangju Uprising. In 2015, I was opening an exhibition in Venice. It was 8th of May. Many art crowds came to my show and mentioned that they had heard about the censorship of Hong Seong-dam's picture in Gwangju. Hong had painted 세월 5월, and his painting had been censored and its removal requested from a show commemorating the 20th anniversary of the founding of the Gwangju Biennale. However, 2015 was again a different time altogether because the older generation had chosen Park Geun-hye, the daughter of the assassinated President Park Chung-hee, as the president. As if the clock had been turned back, it had become unacceptable to criticize the ruling government. But Hong never stopped criticizing the government openly and depicted President Park as a puppet controlled by her dead father. Hong made a direct comparison, blaming the Sewol ferry disaster on the government's incompetence and echoing the killings of the innocent in the Gwangju uprising. When the painting was censored, provoking protests from international artists, it attracted attention that the government did not want. Back then, no one would have guessed that President Park would be impeached in 15 months' time in what we now call the Candle Revolution.
You can see the screens of crimson lacquer. You can see the pale green roof ornaments. You can see the billowing cream silk canopies. You can see the hangings of vast pink painted peonies. You can see the serried ranks of courtiers in robes of carmine and sage green and peacock blue. But although my portrait could not be included in this empty scene, although no image of me at that ceremony or at any other ceremony survives, although my very names have perished, I was there. I really do think it's that little red dress that she wanted as a child. And there was something about that image of this child wanting a dress that spoke to me so strongly, because it's such an extraordinary thing to find in a historical document, you know. And her self-knowledge was so great. I mean, her interest in psychology, her interest in her family, and although you can tell that at times she's sort of pleading a cause, at the same time her curiosity about motivation is so, and I just felt myself engaged with her in a way that I would have thought impossible, because it's a big historical gap and it's a huge cultural gap. But at the same time, she seemed to me to be speaking quite clearly to me. I was thinking about sort of universal human nature, whether we all have, from all cultures, have something in common, so that there is some sort of general spiritual recognition across cultures. And I just found that very, very interesting as an idea, because she was a contemporary of Jane Austen, and the worlds could not be more different. You know, Jane Austen lived this quiet little English life, and she lived a court life of extreme violence and sort of expense and violence, and yet they were both writing with such confidence and command of language and seeming to know what they were doing. And I just found that it's also very interesting that she wrote in Hangul, and that she obviously expected her story to live on.
I'll go back to heaven again, hand in hand with the dew that melts at a touch of the dawning day. I'll go back to heaven again with the dusk, together as we two, at a sign from a cloud after playing on the slopes. I'll go back to heaven again at the end of my outing to this beautiful world, I'll go back and say that was beautiful.
Chun Sang-byung was a poet who was also tortured. His life must have been neither heavenly nor beautiful. These words, translated by Brother Anthony into English, evoke the simple style in which he wrote. Lady Hae-kyung wrote in Korean characters, although she knew Chinese characters very well. This would be like choosing English rather than Latinate discourse of academia in the early Victorian time. Chang Jia's painting is not about the environment. She composed the art from the pixels cut out from bacteria seen under the microscope. The water came from a river made stagnant by Korea's aggressive river regeneration plans. However, one has to go further to see why she made a Taoist paintings out of this unperceivable world. The classical Korean painter An Gyun painted Dream Journey to the Peach Blossom Land, completing it in 3 days after Prince Anpyeong had told him about his dream. One reads it from left to right, just like the journey of his vision. At the far left, the scenery is typical natural landscape. It becomes rocky and abnormal when the person reaches purgatory. The root also disappears into the cave, then reappears. On the far right, there is the peach blossom land, the Shangri-La, surrounded by high mountains. An-gyun never depicts the root reaching utopia, the Shangri-La. One is for the first pronoun I. The film starts with my voice. In many ways, exhibitions always begin with someone's voice. But this voice is abandoned because of the specific framing or the third-person subjectivities in which exhibitions are presented. I start the film with my voice to demonstrate a parallel with a history that has always begun from someone's perspective. Two is for the binary positions. In the West, two oppositions are apparent. In the East, the notion of yin and yang assumes each element to be within the other. The sun exists alongside with the moon. The moon is the reflection of the sun. 3 Eastern philosophies in harmony. Taoism, Buddhism, and Confucianism were once in harmony, but this has been suppressed through the modernization of the Eastern countries. I also focus on 3 artists in my research: Park Chang-kyung, Choi Jung-hwa, and Jia Jang. 4 is for the 4 people who appear in the film who were tortured. The South Korean composer Yoon Sang was tortured as he went to North Korea in the 1960s and died in Germany in exile. His music became the basis for Park Chang-kyung's work, Flying. Chun Sang-byung was a poet. Brother Anthony cites one of Chun's poems as the only poem he remembers by heart. Chun Sang-byung was completely innocent but tortured because of something he said. 2 artists, Hong Song-dam and the anonymous painter who answers the prosecutor's interrogation through hypnotherapy, had quite different experiences. Both belong to Minjung art movement. One continues resistance. 5 is for the 5 elements of the East. It is expressed in our days of the week. Sunday is the sun, Monday is the moon, Tuesday is fire, Wednesday water, and Thursday is wood. Friday is the metal, and Saturday is the earth. The 5 peaks were the 5 elements with the sun, yang, and the moon in coexisting. 6 is the importance of the 60th anniversary, signifying a rebirth. Reincarnation or the karma all contributed to this culture of forgetting well. 7 is for 7 works representing aesthetics that does not conform to the Western tradition of perspective and sculpture. They are the Korean Royal Manuscript of 1809, Lee Hyun-se's cartoon, a Minjung woodblock print, Shinhyunbok's genre painting of a bar, Hong Seong-dam's propaganda painting, the royal screen of Sun, Moon and Five Peaks, and the Taoist painting of Shangri-La from the 15th century. 8 is for the year 1980. This is the year I was born, the year of the Gwangju Democratic Uprising, and the year of the cartoon cleansing movement, as well as the year Reality and Evocation exhibition was shut down. 9 represents the 1990s, in which seismic social and political change was happening. Both the rise and fall of the storm called progress was met by Asian financial crisis and the fall of the Soviet Union. 10 is for the 10 characters of the year that returns. 10 symbols represent 10 variations of the yin and yang of the 5 elements. The numerical equivalent of each year can be identified by the name of the year. Q is for the Lady Haekyung, whose subjective voice brought me the revelations about what curating is for. K is the King Yeongjo, who was the most celebrated, as well as the most feared king. J is for the judge, referring to the judgment in the eyes of history. Can artists be different judges of the past? Can artists reveal historical amnesia? Now we are at the end of this exhibition. 4 years ago, when I began this exhibition, memories were fragmented. This journey has revealed many puzzling pathways. Now I may have found a route in this maze, but yet there may be another entry and an exit.